Hi everybody. So if you saw part 1, when I started this journal page, I shot it on time lapse with my iPhone, and I did not realize exactly how fast it was going to go. So 15 minutes of work down to 30 seconds. It was a little crazier than I expected it to be. So part 2, I'm going to finish this page, but I also wanted to kind of go backwards a little bit and explain what you saw so quickly happen in that first video. I started with this Venus of Willendorf transfer that you may have seen I did in a previous video about a gel medium transfer. It's on a very fiber-based paper. So the first thing I did was glue that down. I used golden gel medium as my glue, and I spread it on with an old card to cover a large area quickly. I also glued down this kind of gray mulberry paper that you see along the edge of the page. Color palette I'd picked for this page was definitely earth tones, because the Venus of Willendorf is such an ancient figure, carved from stone, I believe, although there were other goddess figures from the similar era carved in bone. But I picked kind of yellow ochres and some dark maroon and some grays as my palette to have it be kind of earthy, organic, thinking about cave paintings, thinking about that kind of vibe. So what did I do next? There is a piece of mulberry paper up here. This section is all tissue paper from a clothing pattern. So you can see some of the line work from the pattern in here, but it's cut up in small bits and glued down with gel medium. Underneath here, definitely over here, is some white gesso that was also spread on with a card. I like that kind of fast, loose approach of spreading it, but also the texture that you get. I did the color accent with scraps of mulberry paper in the red here and here. So right now there are just those 2 maroon notes, and I do think a third note is going to be necessary to unify the composition. This thin strip here is actual papyrus made from reeds of the papyrus plant that are laid crosswise in different directions, pounded, and then as the fiber from the plant dries, you get the paper. So that is accurate to ancient Egypt, although of course it's a modern version of the paper that, I found at an art supply store. One of the things that I did in the video was drip some ink here. And I thought it was a sepia ink, and the color I got was so blackish purple. It's really appealing to me. I don't want to cover that up, although I think this section of the collage still needs some work. One of the last things I did was to print on a stamp. This is a new stamp to me. It's some kind of distressed circles and lozenge shapes. And so I stamped that on in kind of a honey yellow ochre. I wanted it to unify this section, and it's still a little weak here. You can see a bit of the pattern down here. So I let everything dry. In the time-lapse video, I did get out the heat gun and dry things a little bit so that you could see different steps in the process, not realizing they would be going by so quickly that you wouldn't actually be able to tell what's going on. So it's dried overnight, and I want to go back in and finish some things. You are going to notice detail here in the figure that I came back in with a little golden fluid acrylics, both in yellow oxide and in burnt sienna. So I wanted to use some yellow oxide, and some Titan Buff. I've got them all right here in front of me. Right. So I used some Titan Buff to highlight the high points on the sculpture and the gold and the rust to kind of bring out the shadows. It starts to play well with this maroon here, so I think some more rust is probably what's going to happen up here to unify things. So it's close to done. I'd thought perhaps I would add words, but I don't feel that anymore. But something here. This is when I like to do layering things, maybe some stenciling. I don't want to obscure what's going on, but I need a different element to tie it all together. Looking at the page as a composition, there's this kind of curve here, which echoes the shape of the figure. There's this vertical piece and this horizontal piece that kind of frame on that side. So then this movement is happening down and around, but then it leaves you in this quadrant, kind of just leaves you hanging. So something up here that kind of kicks your eye, directing it back into the figure. The figure's the focal of this, but she's off center because I find having the focal in the center is a bit of a static, boring composition. So let me switch the camera around. Stay with me. This is going to get a little jiggly, and then I'll go ahead and do some stenciling on this piece. Oh, look. This spiral stencil I cut from a piece of cardstock. You can tell that I don't wash it because it is just cardstock, but I think that movement is what I want. Kind of like that. So yes, this is the reverse of the stencil because I want this movement coming that way. So that's where I want to stencil it. Nope, it's a little too close to her. Since we are doing a layer on top of other layers. Sometimes I stencil with a sponge. Sometimes I use a stencil brush. Because this is kind of a small area I'm covering and it's a linear design, I'm just going to use your classic short, stubby stencil brush. And if I get a little bleeding under the stencil, I'm okay with that too. I want the spiral as a design element. I want it as a color added in. It doesn't have to be pristine. It does not have to have a really sharp edge. This color brings to mind iron oxide, you know, red ochre from the earth, which would have been a pigment that was used in the era that brought us the Venus of Willendorf, so it seems appropriate. All right, let's see if that worked. Yep, I like that. May need a little bit more. Center of the spiral, I want more. Since I modified the texture of the center point, I'm going to do some of that around the spiral in other spots so that it's consistent, so it doesn't look like just that one area was affected. I'm actually going to widen it a bit up here. So I could have just done that with a brush, but the spiral caught my eye when I was looking through my stencils, so there you go. I think Yep, just a little bit there. Giving the impression that the spiral continues off the page, but really reinforcing this curve, now this curve. So that I'm happy with. Does there need to be that rust color anywhere else? There's a little bit down here. Just a hint on top of that design from the stamp. Yeah. So now I think it's really interesting here where there's the gold over top of the strangely purple ink with the gesso behind and the layer of this spiral. So this really draws my eye, and I thought this had some really nice bleeding where I'd sprayed the ink with water. So that's good. I'm happy with that. If I were going to add words, it would be a really lovely spot to add them just in one line along this curve in this kind of dark purpley black. But I'm going to leave it as is for now. Think on that. Let it dry. Work on something else. So stay tuned. That was a strange combination of real-time and extremely fast art journaling, but a sample page, and I'll bring you more in another video. Or perhaps we'll go back to the ceramic studio next time. We'll see. But as always, hope you liked it. Subscribe, stay tuned. All my info is down below, so see you next time. Thanks.